amount of time. I get to start, of course. Premier, thank you for your speech. I'm going to try to take a little bit of a leaf out of your book and start with a sort of personal connection, if I can. I was reminded when you put up the unemployment rate chart that sort of went back to the 1970s, the late 1970s. But I'm actually one of those people whose family came to Australia, and South Australia, and Adelaide in particular, looking for new opportunity. So as a migrant, I remember arriving, moving into a rental on Tint Street in North Adelaide. So when you're sort of talking about these things and you brought up your sort of family history, I thought, well, let's start with that, because it goes straight to one of the biggest challenges I think we have in Australia at the moment, which you yourself alluded to. You've talked about the workforce needs here. You've talked about population growth. You've been probably politically brave, maybe some would say crazy brave, in identifying that population growth is going to be needed and important for this state. That is not the narrative that's happening around the country at the moment. There is, quite frankly, a lot of pushback on immigration. And in my view, it's become a scapegoat issue for so many other challenges, which you also alluded to in housing. So I just thought I'd start by starting with a sort of personal connection. You know, I get the opportunity piece, and by the way, that whole framing of how do we capture the opportunities and think about strong economy and strong social compact, as Justin said, I mean, it's just music to the ears of CEDA, because that's what we're on about. But could you talk a little bit more about how you think you can kind of win the day on immigration, and you know, how are you going to be a voice into a national conversation which seems so different?
I'm worried about it. That's just the truth. You know, I've been pretty consistent about my views on this for a long period of time, and I think people would know, anyone paying attention to my remarks on migration, population, and the need to account for growth rather than pretending it's not going to happen, are well known. And I think if I did anything different, it would be called out for the inauthenticity that it has. I saw, so I don't want to be partisan, but I'll just make some political observations that are just obvious. Obviously, One Nation's on the rise. They're clearly going through a moment, if you believe the published polls. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out nationally. It's going to be of interest to me, clearly, about how it plays out locally. You know, and I saw their campaign launch when they announced Corey Bernardi running for One Nation. And you look at it, it's interesting. You saw a lot of Australian flags at the campaign launch, with people wrapping themselves around the flag, and that's okay. I'm cool with that, because I like our flag too. I guess I might have a slightly different view about what our flag represents, though. I don't look at the Australian flag and see a misdirected sense of nationalism. I don't look at the flag and see, colonial oppression. I see a flag that has been party to our country and the record of prosperity and peace that we have been able to generate now for a pretty sustained period in an inclusive, compassionate, multicultural society. That's what this nation represents, I think, to me and most people. But the politics of migration, I think, and the reason why I've mentioned it, I think we need to start injecting a little bit of earnestness and frankness into the political discourse, rather than just trying to be on the defensive for people who think we need a sustainable migration policy. Understand this, right? You can either try and be a King Canute and hold back the tide and wave of jobs coming our way, right? Or you can prepare for them. Now, why on earth would we have a policy debate in this country, or a political debate in this country, about holding back high-paid jobs, right? Because to not have a sustainable a thoughtful policy and migration policy means, oh, we don't want those high-paying jobs. Now, no one believes that. So if you want the high-paying jobs, you have to have the plan about how you're going to get them, right? Now, let's talk about, and I covered that off in my speech, let's talk about other jobs in the economy. And this is where I will say something that Corey Bernardi won't, and the Liberal leader won't, right? You know, my message to One Nation voters is, who's going to feed you and bathe you and wipe your bum when you're 90, right? Because it ain't going to be your kids, because if I get my way, they're going to be working on submarines, right? With high-paying jobs, so they can afford to own their home that has to be built by someone. And who's going to do that work? Right? Let's talk about housing construction and the history of this country. All the really hard jobs, right, the really, physically demanding jobs on housing construction have always been performed traditionally by waves of the most recent migrants. The concreters, the bricklayers, the roofers in 40-degree temperatures, right? That was the Greeks and Italians. And I'm talking in generalisations, right? But it was the Greeks and Italians, and then they got taken over by the Serbs and the Croatians, all working hard. Right? Now we're seeing a lot of Afghans in the industry who work hard and provide for their families too, right? Now, if we're taking people out of the housing construction industry to work on the submarines because they're going to have to be Australian citizens, we're going to need people to do that work too, to work in aged care. So I'm not going to be the guy, I'm not going to allow myself to become the politician who wraps myself in the flag, and then says, I don't want to let people come into South Australia who are going to do the work that no one else wants to. And by the way, right, just like Malinauskas is a name that came out in the First Fleet, nor is Bernardi. So, and we're just going to, now, the extension of that is, let's just be frank and honest about it. Let's try and dispense with the culture war virtue signalling and just say, well, this is what we need. We need to go from 20,000 people growing per annum to 23,000 because we want to get these jobs. And we're going to do that this way, and we've got a plan to build the houses so that everyone can have a decent standard of living. And if we do that, by the way, all we're doing is what we've always done in this state and in this country since Federation. That's made us the place that we're all proud of and all love the flag.
I think
it's not. We just have to be honest about it. Now, look, I accept there's a story in that, and it's a bit different to what we hear other people saying. But punters aren't stupid. Well, they get it.
I think in your speech, the way you framed so much of what you were talking about in the context of, opportunity. I really heard that, and I thought, one of the things we're hearing is there's this tension about opportunity that exists for people who are here now. I think what you've said is there's plenty of opportunity for everyone. It's very clear from your comments today. It's very clear from an announcement that we saw of a $3.9 billion down payment. That's a heck of a project if that's the down payment. Some of the charts that you showed, I shared with a CEDA member audience yesterday, including how well South Australia is performing. Coming into the state, you can feel it, right? There's energy, there's momentum, there is definitely a lot happening. Again, if I reflect some of the comments that members have made to me, some of the comments coming through on the Pigeonhole app, and definitely what you're hearing from around the country, the big question is, where's the capacity? How are you going to build the capacity? How are you going to create the space for this stuff to happen so that people don't feel the pressure of rising rents, of rising cost of living and all of that? And you've sort of touched on it, but I guess it's, a bit more on that, please, in terms of how that becomes a reality and this doesn't become a capacity-constrained kind of environment.
Right. So, which speaks to then the real issue about the maintenance of social cohesion, which has got to be about rising living standards. Now, since we've been here today, the ABS, I'm going to get this up, the ABS has released the wage price index just in the last hour or thereabouts. So it ranks every state around the country. Which state in our country has the highest wage price index growth of all states in the private sector? Yes, correct, South Australia. So, and it's at 3.7%. Nationally, in the private sector, it's 3.3%. We're the highest state. Wages growth in the private sector is higher than what it is in the public sector, and is outpacing the rate of inflation in South Australia. So that is a statistical representation of improving living standards. Now, I think it's naive to go out into the burbs and say, hey, you've never had it so good, because clearly that's not always the case, because not everybody is enjoying that wages growth. The question is making the case to them about how we're going to get as many people as possible into that cohort, into that stream, which does speak to the skills policy and the housing policy, which we've already done a lot on, and we've announced some new policy we're taking to this election, particularly on skills. $500 million program on housing that we announced in terms of underwrite of apartments in the CBD, a council, the property council, deserves some credit for, and we're going to have a lot more to say, which I can't wait to get into in the coming weeks, because I guess the only antidote to that sense of anxiety in the market, in industry, but amongst the community, is to demonstrate that you have a policy agenda to actually respond to it. That's the only hope. I can't come up with a better way to do it. But I just think that if you say to people, my hope is that if we say to people, look, this is going to happen. Like, this is not me as Premier saying, I am trying to achieve population growth to generate economic activity, which is the way we've often talked about population growth in the past. It's like, we've got to grow the population to grow economic activity. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is we've got the economic activity which is going to drive a bit of population growth. And what I've got is a plan to do something about it, rather than saying, no, we don't want your jobs, thanks, take them somewhere else.
I'm going to come back on that in a minute, but I've got a question. I'm going to reward James Brown in the audience. Thank you for your question, and everyone's upvoted it, so I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to say to the audience, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask, please put your hand up and the mic will come to you, and you've got a moment while the Premier's answering this question. So James has asked a question about energy. Absolutely critical to your government's growth ambitions, to the ambitions of this state. Can we do this on renewables alone?
No. And that's never been my view, never been my government's policy. We are accredited as being, I think quite rightly, arguably the most pro-renewable government of any state in the country. But simultaneously, and this is where I guess there's a degree of unorthodoxy to our position, we're also arguably probably one of the most pro-gas jurisdictions in the country, along with Western Australia. Because what we know, what our policy reflects what CSIRO reports and every other expert report on energy in Australia tells us, which is you want renewables backed up by natural gas. Renewables firmed by natural gas. That's our policy. We work closely with Beach and Santos and anybody else who's willing to get gas out of the ground in South Australia, not locking it up, but trying to get it out of the ground. We might yet have more to say about that in the not too distant future. We're a government that's been working with AGL to keep Torrens Island going as a gas-fired generator to back up our renewables. And it also turns out we're on track to get to 100% net renewables by the end of next year, which in turn has now delivered us a stronger position in terms of price in the market than the Eastern Seaboard, as reflected by EMO's most recent report. Now, that doesn't mean that energy bills are going down, because gas prices have been going up, because the last entrant in sets the price, and that's gas. So the problem with price isn't renewables, it's gas. But that's why we want more of it. That's why we want more gas. So, no, renewables, anyone that tells you renewables is going to do it on its own is forecasting out into a period far away from where we are now. It has to be renewables backed up by natural gas, which has always been this government's policy. And while our opponents have locked up gas in our state to chase votes amongst farmers, we've been supportive of gas and have actually delivered upon it.
I think there's a question right at the back of the room.
Thank you. Jason Cookle from Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia. First of all, very happy to see those figures around the concrete demand, of course. As you know, we've been working with your ministers, Ministers Burke and Champion, around concrete demand for housing, and also with the Treasurer as well. And very pleased to see some of the supply and demand work that the Infrastructure SA is embarking upon now. Obviously, you've got a skills plan, you've got a housing plan. We've been talking about the need for heavy construction materials plan for some time. We think it's very, very urgent. Keen to get your thoughts around that, how important that is to make sure we can actually build all those things that you've outlined.
Well, materials is an issue, and that's where we've seen obviously a lot of inflation. More recently, a degree of stabilisation in the market, but we have to do increase capacity. I was up in Port Augusta. You'd be familiar with the project up in Port Augusta with Hallett Concrete by David Pickard. Amazing. It's Hallett, isn't it? I'm looking at Tom. Yes, it's incredible what they're building up there. We turned the sod on it at the beginning of the year. Do you know, this is interesting, do you know what the biggest user of concrete in South Australia is? It's Olympic Dam. Olympic Dam. Because every time they build try to get to the copper, tunnel, whatever, they have to put the layers in, and the volume of concrete that goes into it is astronomical. And as BHP is gearing up its ramp up in production, the market is now trying to respond to be able to produce concrete for Olympic Dam, let alone everything else. So there's obviously new supply coming into the market, but this is where industry policy matters and governments being available to people like yourself, Jason, to say, okay, is it the skills shortage you're concerned about? Is it the materials? Is it the equipment? And doing what we reasonably can. We're not in the business of doing what the private sector should. We're not in the business of intervening in the market, but unlocking growth through specific industry policy we are up for. We facilitated that in the case of Hallett in Port Augusta, their new plant. We unlocked a pipeline of funding that otherwise couldn't be acquired, and that is now being built, and that project gets up and that construction of their facilities open by the end of this year, believe it or not. It's warp speed. So that is a demonstration of how seriously we take it, but we are always looking for ways to partner with industry in a way that's appropriate for government.
Premier, I'm just kind of flagging for my team as well so they don't yell at me later. We're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you two questions, neither of which are quick, but I'm giving we've got a narrow window of opportunity here. The first one, I can't resist coming back on the wages, the value of higher wages, but also just put this question to you. Business doesn't mind higher wages when they're matched by productivity. You've got great results now in terms of people lauding the regulatory frameworks here compared to other states and the tax structures. Is that enough? Where's the appetite for sort of actually really doing more to enable business dynamism and productivity in the state is the first question, and then I'll ask one quick one.
No, first thing is, of course, wages that are growing as a function of just bleeding the broth dry isn't particularly good in the long run, right? That's not a sustainable path. Wages have to be going up on the value of the work that has been performed vis-a-vis the productivity. Now, the thing about the jobs I'm talking about here is they are up the value chain in terms of the type of productivity we're talking about, high-end, high complexity. But more broadly than that, when we think about labour productivity, yes, there is a national challenge here that's impossible to deny. South Australia's labour productivity will improve by virtue of the changing nature of the work that is being performed. Right, the productivity of a job in these industries, amongst others, is obviously greater than aged care, or other similar roles. which is in no way to diminish the importance and the dignity of that work, which is equally as critical. Having said that, there are other areas of government policy that have to step up to the plate to improve productivity in the economy. And one of the things that underpins labour productivity, and many in this room have heard me talk about it before, is R&D. R&D delivers new technologies. New technologies puts labour to better use. And we are massively underdone in this country. Massively underdone. In Israel, something like, I think it's closer to 9% of GDP goes into R&D. In the US, it's about 5.4%. In the Eurozone, we typically see it around about 3%. OECD average is not too far off. We're at 1.8. 1.8% of the Australian GDP goes into R&D. We are laggards. And then we turn around and say, let's have a productivity debate. Now, more often than not, when I'm at forums like this, and if the IPA is there or someone, they'll be saying, they use productivity as a proxy for complaining about wages growth. That's not where I'm at. We don't want to have a productivity debate as a disguise for trying to suppress wages. We're going to be talking about the real areas of the economy that we're underdone in as a nation, and none more critical than R&D. You would be within your rights to say, okay, well, what are you doing about it? Well, what I would say is that when we crafted our speech today in the first cut, I'd still be at the lectern, right? So we will be having things to say about innovation and how that is important to living standards over coming weeks.
I am going to have to respect the time, so I'll park the final question I was going to ask you. But just to let you know, in terms of things you may have also cut out of the speech, there is a huge interest coming through the questions around the social compact dimensions of this, how we make sure those people who've been historically left behind, the communities that have been left behind, and communities that haven't always benefited because they're a bit more remote or out of suburbs. Real interest in that, so you can leave that for another speech.
No, it's the main game,
yeah,
right? Because that's what speaks to the political disruption we're seeing at the moment everywhere in the West. So I've touched on housing. That's most important, right? Because if the house that you want to own is out of reach, or it's just impossible, then you're going to get angry, right? And you're going to blame whoever comes up with the easiest person to blame. So housing I've touched on. I mentioned skills, and I showed you the booklets and the policy we've announced without going into any detail. Let me give you one example, because it's all there, and you can go to our website and you see it all. So I'm not just talking in rhetorically, it's this real policy. So one little example. In that policy booklet is we're investing as a state government, which is normally Commonwealth government area, we're investing in university scholarships. Who are they going for? Well, the university scholarships up to $10,000 each, not up to, $10,000 each for students who go into AUKUS-related degrees at university. Think engineering degrees. And there's basically, AUKUS touches every engineering degree you can think of. So $10,000 for kids to get a university scholarship to say, I'm going to choose, instead of doing law, I'm going to do engineering. Now, who are those scholarships for, Melinda? They're for the exact people you just talked about. We need more women in engineering. At university, we've got the Vice-Chancellor here, Nicola. She will tell you how women are underrepresented in engineering. But so are kids from the burbs, right? And we're out there building technical colleges and telling kids you don't need to go to university to get a good job, which is true, a la the letter I read out. But it's also true if they do go to university, they are going to get a really good job. And kids from low socioeconomic backgrounds need to see their mates getting that chance. So that they're not blaming the migrants, they can see their mate getting the opportunity, which might mean they get one too. That is I don't mind saying, I think it is a really good, I don't want to be deliberately partisan, but I think it's a good Labor policy to provide that opportunity to those who otherwise might not get it, which is one of the remits of the new university that we crafted in the charter within the legislation to make sure that it's not just about more kids, it's more kids from more diverse backgrounds. That's just one example. I could go on. The work that Blair's doing in TAFE is awesome. TAFE is back, and there's more we can do. I've mentioned technical colleges. So these are the things. It's very frustrating because we announced that policy and it got a bit of a run on the news, but not as much as the infrastructure, which people are more easily understand.
We'll do our best to bring it back, because economic inclusion is front and centre for us as well, so we'll make sure we put a pin in that. I am conscious of time. We always try to get people out of here on time, so if I could please invite to the stage Professor Nicola Phillips, Vice-Chancellor and President of Adelaide University. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you very much indeed, Melinda, Premier. Good afternoon, everybody. I have been scribbling so fast on my speech notes that I think I can't read what I was originally intending to say. It's been such a rich discussion. Thank you very much. As many of you know, I've recently joined Adelaide University as the new Vice-Chancellor of a new university, and I was attracted here by the unique opportunity that's afforded to us by the fact that the creation of our university has been placed right at the heart of the vision for South Australia's future that has been discussed in the room today. We've been created to support the momentum, the enduring momentum, and the advancement of South Australia, and by extension our nation and our global community. We exist to serve society, and in order to do that as well as we possibly can as a university, we need and we want to be having exactly these kinds of conversations, talking with, listening to everyone in this room and rooms like it everywhere. We're very proud to partner with CEDA and to sponsor this event on an ongoing basis. I'd like to acknowledge Melinda Salento and thank CEDA for bringing us here today and for the role that they play, you play, in South Australia and around the country, for the connections they make, for the insights they provide, for the way they encourage us all to think about how we can do better. In South Australia, CEDA and our university share a common goal to connect the dots between the ideas of this state's most informed, inspired and influential thought leaders. And for Adelaide University, through both our education and research, our role is to help the best of those thoughts and ideas interact, engage and become reality. On behalf of everyone in this room, I formally thank the Premier for his address, and I thank everybody who shared insightful questions afterwards. We all want to see South Australia take this moment, if I may, Premier, to take our opportunities. And as the Premier pointed out, these opportunities are rich. We heard today about the importance of economic advancement premised on the idea of the expansion of opportunity in all of its forms. And one of the standout takeaways to me is the point that you came to right at the end of the discussion about the connection then not just to social cohesion in a moment around the world where that feels so fragile, but to social justice in the richest sense that is so important in charting our future. Grasping each of these opportunities depends to such an important extent on the same thing, knowledge. Whether that's sharing existing knowledge through education or creating new knowledge through research and innovation, realizing aspirations to advance this state, whatever those aspirations might be now and in the future, requires us to share, grow, and most importantly, value knowledge. We all know the value of the knowledge economy for South Australia, and that economy is extremely important to this state. But that only tells half the story. As universities, we're in the business of educating, nurturing, attracting the thought leaders of today and tomorrow. The professionals, the thinkers, the scientists, the innovators, the skilled workers, the creatives, and perhaps most importantly of all, the informed, engaged citizens that the world so badly needs in all of their diversity. And I use the plural, I said universities, because for the future of South Australia, this is not just Adelaide University, but also Flinders University and TAFE SA and our technical colleges and a host of other education providers. I think we have a responsibility to be working together in the service of South Australia and our society, and I take that very seriously for Adelaide University. So for many reasons right now, as we have heard, South Australia is the state of momentum, characterised by a lot of optimism, a lot of innovative thinking. And we need to ensure that this isn't just a passing moment. We need to ensure that this is intergenerational, that it's enduring, and that it becomes part of the social fabric of this state. So once again, thank you, Premier, for your address today, and thank you everyone for joining us. I look forward to getting to know you all more over the coming months and years as we work together to shape this bright future. And I'll now hand over to Justin Jameson to formally close our event. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So, in the interest of time, we'll move through quite quickly here. Again, thank you all for your participation and engagement today. Really, again, I'd like to acknowledge today's major sponsors, Adelaide University and Minter Ellison, and our supporting sponsor, RAA. The Premier gave us a lot of really good, positive stats around South Australia. I'll give you another stat. For the second year in a row, this is CEDA's highest attending event in Australia. And that's kudos to the crowd that the Premier can draw, but the way that the South Australian people engage in this discussion. So thank you all for that. I do want to call out the CEDA team as well. We have a number of members from the local CEDA team, and nationally as well. A lot of effort does go into this event, so thank you, Melinda, to you and the team. A couple of events coming up that are worth noting. The Climate and Energy Summit on April 30 in Melbourne. And again, that has such a great relevance for South Australia. And then CEDA's keynote event nationally in Canberra on June 24th to 26th, State of the Nation, which will feature a range of issues and discussions for Australians to contemplate. And importantly, it's worth acknowledging that Prime Minister Albanese will address the conference at the opening breakfast event. So with that, I think that the brief is pretty clear, the opportunity is pretty clear. Thank you again, Premier, for your time today. Thank you all for your attendance, and look forward to seeing you all at the next CEDA event. Thank you.